Sue, if you can bring up your presentation, we'll have a look at that next.
Thanks. Evening, everybody. I'm just hoping the technology actually works for me. It's my first time I've done one of these. Okay, so some ramblings, I think, from Sheffield. It's interesting, actually. I think the North's quite different to London and the South. We've got a superabundance often of space, but also a superabundance of poverty, actually, and deprivation. And I suppose that's been my world really for the last 20 odd years. It's been looking at some of the more rundown places where there is green space, but it's such poor quality that what we've actually found is that I suppose that the nature deprivation that Matthew's talked about, people are put off the outside and the outside environment because it's just not inviting. I mean, this is an image that you can see lurking behind this bit of this text. This is the only text I think I've actually got, just to show some of the kinds of environments that people are actually looking at. So when you're trying to escape into your local green space, and it's basically a hostile environment, that's a major thing to actually overcome. Because I was actually trained as a gardener and a horticulturalist, and I call myself a landscape manager now. We've taken a sort of an interesting approach. Well, I hope you might find it slightly interesting. It's only one solution, but it has been an approach that's more based around the sort of the capability brown type style. It's about shaping a landscape through long-term management rather than maybe very, very high level design. But I think it's an interesting solution when we're looking at these large swathes of urban spaces. How do we make them more nature rich, more actually appropriate for people, but also actually how do you actually do it? So this idea about intelligent landscape management, it is unfortunately quite a scarce trait, this. I mean, we tend to try and steal every landscape architect we possibly can from the University of Sheffield who has some interest in actually putting a pair of boots on. And through that, we're starting to develop a cohort of people that get the design angle, get the people angle, but are passionate about plants and this kind of concept of more of an interactive approach. So I think we started with this kind of concept of gardening the wild, this idea that you can take a landscape and you don't actually have to put lots and lots of physical infrastructure into it. It's about if you've got an understanding about how to take the landscape further forward and large scale. So I'm going to show you images around this idea about large scale landscapes, but hugely using the soft materials, very textured. This notion too about change. We're not used to the concept that landscapes, and particularly our urban landscapes, will change over time, will evolve. And I think that's been quite an exciting thing. With both climate change and I think interestingly with COVID too, this idea about flexibility and resilience. What happens if suddenly you can't actually get out and manage your parks for 8 weeks? How resilient actually are they? And in terms of then also, sort of changing use. So, and as we know now, in terms of the urban parks agenda, it's absolutely strapped for cash. How are we actually going to manage these spaces in different ways with less resources? The big thing I think we've been working on in Sheffield too is this notion of enhanced nature. This is about taking something that works ecologically, that is viewed as nature, but it's not. So it's not the purest conservation. It's actually about trying to make something that humans really respond to in an urban environment. And in particular, and you're going to see a lot of these, we think we've been incredibly interested in things like the seeded landscapes that you can actually create from seeding as opposed to planting. That there's some very interesting dynamics you get from seeded landscapes, but also using planting and also looking at essentially the escapees and how you actually work with those and enhance them. And within all this, of course, there is a design element. You have to give people a notion that this is a managed landscape. In an urban environment, people desperately need that. So that might be art forms, it might be structures, but it's those what we call the clues to care. Anything that is something that people know that they're allowed to enter here, that it is something for them, the gateways, the edges, the routes, all this kind of thing. So that's basically what I'm going to show you. So I suppose inspiration to start with, definitely from the wild. This is an incredibly sort of resilient naturalistic landscape, in fact, a natural landscape. Not that anything's very natural in the UK. I think when we started, you either had a landscape like this and you managed it as a conservation landscape, or you didn't. And this is the kind of landscape that you start to think, well, how could you play with this? How could you actually manipulate this in a more gardening sense to keep the resilience of something and the impactfulness of something like this? So here in Sheffield, we've been working hugely on probably really the ground flora. We've worked a lot with meadows and meadow-like kind of plantings. I was in Malmo quite recently, and they've done some very interesting things around the forest canopy, where they've developed a structure with forest canopy, and again then they've actually worked within that. So this is the kind of thing that gave us our inspiration to start with. How could you create these incredibly impactful, and also I think the other word is immersive. What we really like is actually people being able to immerse themselves in these spaces, and to be able to interact with them. So that's a sort of UK example. Of course, what we also really wanted was this, this incredibly powerful, colourful type of landscape, these floral blooms that you get in places like the States, where you're just bowled over by this. There's something that humans respond massively, and particularly well, maybe just all humans respond to colour. It's something that I think on the ecological side, we tend to ignore this innate response that people do have to beauty, to colour, to scale, and this thing that how something like this actually draws people into it. So you get this kind of colour and landscape on a significant landscape scale. And create those spaces within it. So again, this is completely natural. It's actually happening because of the kind of the weather conditions that bring this out. But what it also does is people want to be in it. And I think this is the kind of thing that when we started in Sheffield, we wanted to try and recreate. And it wasn't easy because there wasn't really any notion of how to do it. We got the very first chance actually looking at seeded landscapes, and like lots of places and people, we started with quite simple planting. So these are annual seeded landscapes, and we started with this cracky about 15 odd years ago over housing demolition land, and this was grim environments to be in. Actually, they were gypsy bunded, fly tipped, and basically kind of no-go areas. And we did about 400 odd hectares of seeding, broke just about every piece of machinery we actually had at the time, and transformed them over about sort of an 8-week period into these sort of fields of flowers. And I think this picture just kind of really sums up actually how you can transform something that is pretty hideous into something which brings that countryside right into the city through quite simple mechanisms actually. So this is a cultivation, a seeding, and hey presto, you leave it and it actually grows. So I think this kind of got us going. We followed from this a lot more seeded landscapes, particularly in housing. It seemed to be that the doors were open on the sites and the areas where basically nobody else cared about. So much more difficult to get into those places which were precious, but in the ones where it was derelict, where there was no hope, where there was no budget. This is really very much where we learned the kind of trade of this. Again, just different kinds of ways. This is my little my country estate in the social housing. So this notion that you start to play with things. These aren't native plants. These are cultivars. These are ornamental garden plants. But people don't see them like that. People see them as basically enhanced nature, as something that they recognize. And what was interesting, I think, through a lot of this kind of work, we're seeing how actually people right across all spectrums just responded to this kind of immersive and hugely expansive landscape, started to creep out onto things like roadways and verges. And what we were learning again with this was about things like the human response to this. Will people tolerate a move from the neat, the tidy? Will they actually start to tolerate the idea of seasonality? Because within this too, obviously, you also get things like 6 months where there is nothing here. How do people tolerate the winter appearance of these kinds of landscapes? And you start to kind of build up a picture about what people will expect, what their expectations actually are. You start to see, obviously, the biodiversity kind of gains in terms of particularly the native fauna that actually are drawn to this. But also you have to learn the technical sides of this, because we talk a lot about this, but actually doing it is another matter, you know, and doing it on scale and to a budget has been a really, really interesting learning curve. A lot of this went to the Olympics. That was probably the first time that there was, you know, such a massive immersive landscape where you saw an inversion, really, from, instead of the large expanses of grass and the few flower beds, to the idea that the bulk of this, the bulk of the experience, would in fact be a floral and planted soft landscaping, of which you sort of progressed amongst. So it was a kind of a complete inversion. Take all your grass out, create these planted areas, and people actually walk and occupy spaces within that. So I think this is quite a, it sounds incredibly simple, but it's got a radical change to do this. And of course, within this too, what you've got to then be able to do is to be able to do this year on year, to manage it and go on year on year. So these are classic Sheffield sites, which people got quite familiar with, really, this idea of the wildness in the city. One of the big things we learned from this too is that change and variety, on a large scale, nothing has to be perfect. It gets away from this notion of perfection. The colours here, this is just one mix of just annual seeds again, but it's because this is a capability brown landscape actually, that had a massive clearance. And what you've got is underlying different soil conditions. So this idea about you shape things like your substrates, and with quite simple plantings, you get this incredible sort of impressionistic views and changes going on right through the season. And again, what we found was really interesting was how people responded to this notion of seasonality and change again. I think, again, our urban landscapes have become so static that people, it's the classic B&Q thing, isn't it, really, the B&Q landscape, where you don't really expect to interact with that at all. And so this idea of change, and being able to immerse in the scale was really interesting. Again, people in those flower landscapes. And right across the spectrum, lots of stuff with housing. We seem to be doing an awful lot of work, not surprising, I suppose, because of our base around particularly social housing and trying to make the landscapes around social housing. What's been probably the less positive thing on this is how terribly difficult it is to move from particularly amenity grass to something else, and to get particularly things like housing developers, housing associations, and whatever, to make that change. This is seen as pretty frightening, really. It's about the specifications for this, and it is about the fact that it takes back to the fact that it takes some intelligent management, not more management, but intelligent and horticultural management. And so it's quite a long battle to try and get enough schemes up and running, and to get people around them to see that they can work, and to ensure that you're overseeing every part of the specification. This is a whole new housing site which we must have been fighting to work with everybody for about 8 years. It's all based on sustainable urban drainage and a naturalistic planting scheme, all meant to be a variety of low and different fertility substrates, so that the planting will evolve over time with management. Of course, and then you turn up next day and you find that the contractor has just nipped in quickly and just topsoiled everything, which is unfortunately all too common. The annuals have been great fun to work with. They've got a real place to play in kind of winning hearts and minds and gaining confidence. But we really wanted to work with much longer term perennial planting. But the reality is that actually this kind of enhanced nature with perennial planting is amazingly difficult to do. I mean, we've been working on developing the schemes for a very long time, but they are challenging. They require a lot of attention in the first few years. And it's not until about the last few years when we've been developing a product that is actually grown off-site basically as a flower mat. This is our turf fields, that it's allowed us to really start to introduce this kind of a feature into urban landscapes. So again, this is a perennial meadow, enhanced. It's not native. It's got native species in it, but it's enhanced right in the middle of a housing estate, social housing, where they have absolutely grabbed this idea, and every piece of the landscape has been converted into these perennial flower meadows. Quite intense flowers. The residents have been terribly involved in this. They've been doing a lot of sort of art projects and community projects actually around this, welcome packs, all this kind of thing. And it's an ongoing initiative. But it's just, again, a complete change from just having the one little flower bed. You know, going back to that picture of those two ladies sitting on the bench, this would have been that place without this kind of a feature. Yeah, just again, sort of adapting things to different climates. Again, the scale of this, starting to actually see this appearing in scale. So these are seed sown perennial enhanced meadows, very immersive, very robust, very resilient, which essentially are cut once a year with a cut and collect, and that's the management operation. So it's this kind of thing, trying to bring this into the cities. This is Solihull. Solihull have just done a vast infrastructure project where they're trying to bring nature right into the city. They've done a huge mixture of different kinds of approaches, but they've certainly introduced on a vast scale through all the verges, roundabouts, key spots. This is just outside the train station. Again, this kind of a planting scheme. So this is going to be quite fascinating to watch, to see how this actually unfolds in the next few years. But straight away, it tends to get less blingy as time goes on. But what it does to start with is it takes people on that journey with you as well. We often find that in some places you need to take people through a process where they accept this, and then they kind of grow with it, and then you can start to actually take them into more less blingy kind of areas, for want of a better word. And again, just uses the same kind of materials around different kinds of sites. So the more we're doing this, the more we're able to play with lots of different kinds of compositions and lots of different kinds of styles. So it's trying to develop these techniques across a very wide spectrum of environments, and trying to find out exactly actually how they can operate, so that this can be rolled out wherever it seems to be most appropriate. And being able to, I suppose, to give the confidence that this will actually work over a long time, because this has been something that's been quite significantly lacking. This is Sheffield City Centre. This is more of a planted scheme. Again, Matthew was showing the images of the community group actually planting up the verges actually in London. This is a more, well, I think it's 1 year on actually from planting. This has been the rip-up of basically the inner city ring road, completely no-go area actually. It was a hideous area that no one used whatsoever. Very imaginative design. It's based on depths of about 200 mil of gravel actually, but it also takes all of the surface water runoff. So it's not just actually bringing this kind of countryside right into the middle of the city centre, but it's also dealing with all the floodwater management as well. So this idea that you can create much more resilient and wildlife friendly planting, but with high visual impact in very, very urban areas. This has got some really hard urban edges to it, but at the same time, it's also dealing with a significant inner city flooding issue as well. That's just one side of it. This is now in something like phase 3. It's going right through the city, and it has transformed the use of this entire area, with everyone now sitting out, enjoying the lunch, actually out there. Again, that's another shot of that. So we kind of go really from the very ephemeral and transitory through to something which is more, I suppose, more bringing the countryside into town, but very much trying to transform the amenity grassland into something completely different, to the very hard-edged urban. But it's this complexity of planting, and the fact that this planting will change and grow. So just back to our starting point again. This was the edge of a project that we worked on with the Sheffield City Council to transform, was it 22 hectares into a district park. That's what we started with. That's what it looks like now. And the trick here is to take all of these kinds of approaches. Again, the idea is that the vast majority of this is planting compartments. You might see there is a network of paths, but there's also a network of informal paths, mown paths. And what they're doing is they are separating vegetation compartments. Some of these are highly planted and ornamental in naturalistic styles. Others are basically found landscape, exactly what we actually found there, but we've worked on them. We haven't left them exactly as they are. We've identified species within them. Some of these have been there for a long time. Others are allotment and garden escapees, and we've worked with that vegetation to actually enhance it. So this idea of a matrix vegetation in what is an extremely, believe it or not, urban park works extremely well, because you literally get in and you're able to manage these huge compartments with quite simple techniques, normally with cutting techniques. Some of these compartments might be just cut once every 5 years, and you can move them around, and therefore things like nesting birds and what have you actually move around. Others might be cut on an annual basis, and then things like the verges and the activity arenas are cut on a much higher rotation. And even those arenas there are actually functional. They are part of a 100-year flood system. So this is actually a park that is designed all around sustainable urban drainage. There's 3 SUD schemes, very significant ones, taking all of the water runoff from all of the surrounding housing, and a 4th major one going in. Just a few more sites of that. That's one of the probably hundreds of SUD basins actually in this. Again, this idea that if you manipulate and have a diversity of land, form, moisture, shade, and what have you, and quite intense planting that is introduced, things start to sort of jump the fence. They move into the places that they're happiest with, and you get an incredible diversity for quite simple management. So you don't keep the plants in the beds that they started. It's about allowing them to move and migrate. And to do this, what you actually need is you need to really, really introduce lots and lots of plants. And that's the bit that actually takes time. We were lucky on this site that there were a lot of garden escapees and remnant bits of vegetation, but then we have, in a sense, supercharged it. So this is the bit that you have to build this up. And once you've got that supercharged, you can start to actually work with it. Again, that's very native meadow planting. Again, that just comes up every single year. It's cut down every year. And we would do probably a once a year incredibly targeted spot spray on that, just to kind of knock back the odd dock and nettle clump. That is, we still do some annual borders actually within that. And last but not least, these are seeded perennials. So again, you can see that kind of complexity of a very, very high intense sort of floral landscape, big attractor to everything, but it's all basically managed by mowing. I think that's probably where I'm going to stop. Okay, thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Sue. That was really fascinating.